Good evening. Before we go live, would you please turn off or silence your cell phone and any other electronics that you have? That includes the panel too, please. And then please stand and recite with me the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. My name is Nina Rosamondo, and I am president of the League of Women Voters, South County. I would like to welcome you this evening on behalf of the League to our program, The State of Civics Education. The League, since its inception exactly 100 years ago, has advocated for civics education. In fact, the League of Women Voters Rhode Island Charter, which was issued by the state on April 1st, 1919, states the League's purpose is, and I quote, "the education of women in civics and the advancement of better government." Today, the League's primary mission remains the same, and some would argue the issue has become more urgent with time. Judge Sandra Day O'Connor, a great fan of civics, as some of you may know, has said, and I quote, "The practice of democracy is not passed down through the gene pool. It must be taught and learned anew by each generation of citizens." Civics knowledge and public engagement, according to many sources, is at an all-time low across the country, although there was an uptick in public engagement after the 2016 election. Only 23%, or 1/4, of American high school seniors score at or above proficient in civics on the National Assessment of Educational Progress. In 2016, only 56% of voters turned out for the midterm elections, which puts the U.S. 26th out of 32 highly developed democratic nations in terms of, so far as I am concerned, the most important kind of civic participation. Tonight's program stemmed from the League's long-term commitment to promoting civics education and to the announcement, as many of you know, in November 2018, of a federal lawsuit by 14 Providence students against Rhode Island's governor and education officials. The suit, Cook versus Raimondo, charges the state with not providing all students with the education and skills necessary to, quote, function productively as civic participants. So what does Rhode Island require? The Rhode Island Department of Education has K-12 guidelines for teaching civics principles each year and allows each school district to decide how and when to teach civics and government. In contrast, 39 other states mandate a specific civics course of 1 semester or longer for high school graduation, and 15 states require tests on civics and American history for graduation. Our program, I believe, is just the beginning of looking at civics education in Rhode Island. There is a recently re-energized, I understand, coalition for civics education and a newly reconstituted legislative commission on civics education. And the League will be watching and hopefully participating in what you do. Tonight, we are privileged to have representatives from 4 South County systems to speak about civic educations in their schools. They're listed, we debated this, you're listed in alphabetical order, not some political order, okay? So, on the left here, we have from Chariho, Ms. Jane Daly, is it? Daly. Assistant Superintendent, and Mr. Robert Whitaker, Chair of the Social Studies Department. From Narragansett, we have Dr. Peter Cummings, Superintendent, Ms. Christine Hayes-Leet, Chair of the Social Studies Department, and Mr. Matthew Joubert, Social Studies teacher. From South Kingstown, we have Miss Andy Kenyon, social studies teacher. And I guess Miss Story was unable to make it tonight. So if you want to move over one, feel free. That's Mr. Tony Lamentowitz, chair of the social studies department from Westerly. Our moderator this evening is Miss Deborah Kopek, who holds a degree in history and has had a long career in human resources. Since retiring, she has worked on state-level political campaigns, testified at state legislative committee hearings, and co-chairs a grassroots South County women's social justice organization. Most recently, she has become an instructor at Your Eyes OLLI program, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, with a course entitled Civics Redo, for those of us who have forgotten what maybe we learned in middle school and high school.
Okay, I'm on right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome, and thank you for spending your evening with us in Narragansett. We have a series of questions, and the first one is for teachers only, and the second one is for the superintendents. And we would like each of you to answer, superintendent, I guess, right? Sorry. And we'd like each of you to answer this question. After we do that, all the questions going forward are for anyone who wants to answer them, and each of you has a yellow card in front of you. If you want to answer the question, please raise the yellow card, and you can't not ever raise a yellow card, okay? Just want to say. This is not soccer. This is civics. Okay, so for teachers, the very first question is, please describe the courses your school system offers at the high school level or any other activities related to civics specifically. And we will start from left to right. So Ms. Daly?
Well, I'm going to actually let RJ answer that because he's the
Okay.
social studies department chair.
All right.
We offer U.S. History 1, which has a civics component in it. We just actually, a couple of years ago, revamped the curriculum to embed that in there. And also we have U.S. History 2, which both of those classes are requirements for students to graduate.
Okay.
In addition to that, we also have included this year a civics test, actually, for kids to pass and put into their portfolio, so it becomes a graduation requirement.
Can I just ask one question? Is there any specific civics activity prior to high school that you know of?
Yeah, in the middle school, there's also embedded into their curriculum as well.
Okay.
I'll just add to that too. In the 8th grade, they take a trip to Washington D.C.
Oh,
for a few days. So,
Excellent. Ms. Hayes-Leet?
In Narragansett, we have, in the 9th grade, they take world history. As part of world history, there are civic engagement. It's not just a survey course. At the beginning, they do a state of the world exploration, and at the end, they're writing letters to the senator about how they think genocide, how the U.S. should respond in the event of genocides. Then in the 10th grade, we have government.
And with the government, one important project that we've had for many years now is the C-SPAN Student Cam project. And that's a project that involves a lot of research, and another unique part of it is the students reach out to their elected leaders for interviews and to other experts. Another key class that's an elective is Law and Society, which really helps students explore constitutional issues and some of the landmark Supreme Court cases that they analyze. And then we do have a civics course for seniors that also incorporates the senior project. So there's multiple programs and projects, action-based projects, where they learn how to, the importance of being engaged in terms of an active citizen. So they write a letter to the editor, normally during the election time. They petition their school committee members or administrators for something they want to change within the school. So those are some of the main courses.
And the required courses are the government class in 10th grade, U.S. history in the 11th, and the civics and senior project. So those all must be passed in order to get a degree from Narragansett High School.
So is it civics or senior project, or civics and?
Civics and.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Kenyon?
All right. At South Kingstown High School, like many of the other two school districts, we have it embedded. Freshman year, when students come in, they take Western Civ for the most part, and their civic, as the state guidelines, their civics embedded inside the courses. They either take global studies or American legal sophomore year, and then U.S. history junior year. I teach an elective of civics, but it's just an elective. And next year, we're starting the senior project, which again will have, very similar to Narragansett, it will have a civics component, but there's not a class that is just mandatory civics at South Kingstown.
Okay. Mr. Leminowitz?
So much like the other South County districts, Westerly has the civics grade span expectations embedded in curriculum K to 8, but it's at the high school where it becomes more course specific and more specific to civics. In world history or humanities, that's like ninth grade choice that students take, one of the two. They look at the source of power, how it's distributed, different forms of government. Then in 10th grade, they take a U.S. history course, where they talk a little bit more about the Constitution and how the American government was set up. And then in the 12th grade year, they take a course called Citizenship in a Democracy, where we're getting kids ready to be that full-fledged citizen with understanding of the rights and responsibilities of a citizen in a democracy. It's also a course that helps support a senior project, a senior exhibition that our students do, and part of that project has to have a civics component embedded, something where they can at least show that what they're doing is giving something back to the community at a minimum.
So I have one sort of follow-up question, because when I prepared, excuse me, the program that I prepared for the older citizens of Rhode Island, one of the things I looked at was civics beyond American government, and looked at state government and municipal government, and I was curious if anybody has any components like that.
So in government for 10th graders, towards the end of the course, they do actually an activity where they read the Rhode Island Constitution and have to answer different questions, and they see a lot of the similarities with the U.S. Constitution.
Right.
In South Kingstown, in my electives course, we do that with the state and local governments too. Like we do a very similar activity of comparing and contrasting the two constitutions.
If you ever get a chance to take them to a town council meeting, that's always fun. Okay, thank you. For Superintendent, for Dr. Cummings, can you please describe how your school system adheres to the Rhode Island Department of Education guidelines for K through 12 regarding grade span expectations for civics and government?
Sure, and certainly I'll pass that to Jane after I do my part. So we in Narragansett have what's known as K-12 vertical teams. And what we do with those is that we plan our curriculum out really pre-kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. Right. And so as a district, what we really look at is how is knowledge and skill building over time, from grade to grade, school to school. So for example, our students in 8th grade go very deep into American history, and they are strong participants in National History Day. So we have a number of students who go into very deep research projects around some aspect of American history and the relations to government, how government functions, and the effects on people. Well, they take that experience and bring it into the high school, and when they're starting to do research projects at the high school, they know how, when they go very deep into something, it affects the lives of people, and history and these grade span expectations come alive when they go into these action research projects. So, for example, in Matt's civics class, when they do this C-SPAN challenge every year, he's had students look at a local issue and relate it to a federal mandate. And so everything from, access for students with disabilities to voting rights to you name it, our students are winning awards at a national level, right. But they're doing so by studying a local issue. And so for us, we do that all throughout. So in the early grades, it's about how does a society work? How do governments work? In the middle years, it's really getting to a broader perspective in those GSEs, thinking about how do I interact with the world? And then we get to the high school, it's embedding those pieces. So we're very intentional around how we map that curriculum.
Okay. Ms. Daly?
I don't think I can top that. So I can tell you that what we have is every 5 years we have a curriculum cycle and review each of our curriculums. And so history, social studies was reviewed probably 2-3 years ago. We have a team of teachers that do that, and they do that same vertical articulation, looking at grades K to 12, what students should know and be able to do at each grade level. And certainly the depth of knowledge gets a lot deeper as they get older. In the elementary levels, we work with the teachers to make sure that curriculum is delivered consistently across the 4 schools. And at the younger grades, it does build from when they think about themselves, they think about their community, and then they learn about the state government, and that's in 4th grade. And then in middle school, like I said, U.S. history, right? In 8th grade, they do learn deeply about U.S. history, the beginning of the country. The students do take a trip to D.C., which is a great experience. And then at high school, there's required courses, but there are quite a few electives too. Some of the things also we've done at the high school just last year, we had Secretary of State Nellie Gourveia come, and she spoke with all the students in 11th and 12th grade about voting, and we actually had voting booths so that they could see what that experience was like. So I think it's very important, and it's something that we stress in the classroom, but also in activities too.
That's great. I will say, having heard Nellie speak many times, I would urge everybody to have her come as a guest speaker because she's so dynamic and wonderful. And I think the Department of the Secretary of State it's pretty amazing and engaged. And they have a great website too, just so you know. Okay. I'm a fan. Okay, so this one's for everybody, so yellow cards up when you're ready. What do you see as the role of public education in producing high school graduates who are adequately prepared to be educated voters and to become civically engaged? And I think that's in the context of both the number of people who vote and, the testing that's been done to find that people sometimes don't even realize that we have 3 branches of federal government, so. Ms. Hayes,
I'll start it off.
Okay.
So one thing that has always guided my practice, and certainly fellow members of the department, and I'm sure every teacher up here, is that in order to engage students in sometimes some dry material, you have to make it relevant to them, and you have to connect it to their lives. And a big trend in education nowadays is also personalization and finding places in the curriculum, which I think we've heard great examples of up here, where students can have choice, whether it's National History Day or the C-SPAN, all of these projects that kids get to really dive in deep, find something that matters to them, and really be a member of the community. It puts all of that knowledge to work. So they begin to understand what happens when they are reaching out to a senator. And
Right.
I don't think there's anything that can replace that, those types of experiences in their learning. And so that's something that I think is got to be first and foremost in any curriculum that is going to engage students as citizens.
Right.
I think it's also very important to, I feel like social studies has taken, or history has taken a back seat to a lot of the 3 other main courses. So I think that would be like to see social studies come out to the forefront, because a lot of our students, at least I would say, do like the classes. We do have a lot of kids that reach out into the community. I've had 2 students so far win the $10,000 Student Youth Scholarship Award to go to DC and meet the president. And they do some great things. They have so many outreach, like working at South Kingstown. I see kids on a daily basis, trying to figure out how to make a community better. And that is wonderful. But I would like to see for the state to follow suit with the other 39 states and really make civics, history, more of a forefront. I know my own children in school who are in elementary school. It's science, it's reading, writing, and math. And social studies is Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and Martin Luther King. And I would like to see a little bit more of a step forward in the state to make, civics and history a little bit more on the forefront of education.
Anybody else? Tony?
I would agree with everything that's been said so far. It's absolutely our responsibility. There's no better place for it to happen. I think we can deliver quality education to all our students so that they can become good citizens in our democracy. I agree that there's been an overemphasis on other areas like reading and math and science, but I think at the secondary level, I know I have a bias, but there's probably no more important course that we teach than citizenship and democracy, because they're about to become full-fledged citizens and they need to know how their system works, how they can access power, how they can make change. And high school should be the vehicle through which everyone receives that education and goes forward and makes this country a better place.
Okay.
And I'll just, hot mic, okay. I'll just echo that and say, and just add on to that, because I do think, our field is vitally important in the sense of getting kids prepared to be civically engaged, regardless if they become history majors or they don't. The idea of hopefully at the end of a high school education, at least from my perspective, is to have kids become civically engaged, number one. Number two, and understand the fundamentals of a democracy and how it works, and that voting and understanding issues are really the vital part of citizenship, and working hand to hand with that and creating opportunities for kids to be able to access that.
Okay. I'm just curious, this isn't a question that's down here, but I know that one of the things that the Secretary of State's office has done in the last year is this has been going on for a while, but they changed the method. When somebody goes to get a driver's license, you have the opportunity to register to vote. But now, the way that it works as of June of last year is that you're automatically registered to vote. You would have to literally opt out of being registered rather than opt in. So is there any emphasis on, because voting is so important, is there any emphasis on, you have a lot of kids going to get their driver's licenses, on how this is a whole factor in the process?
Sorry, I should have looked at that.
Go ahead, that's okay.
At South Kingstown, especially during the last election and stuff, I had a lot of students coming in who were like, okay, am I registered? We would go through the law, even kids that weren't in civics or at whatever. Oh, I heard about the website, because that website is pretty amazing, I have to tell you. It is so user-friendly.
The creator's right over there.
Yeah, it is, it's well done. It is, because and I was able to show them, down to, all the questions and anything that you want to know about the election. And they were like, okay, I need to know exactly what I'm voting for. It's like, okay, where do you live? Let me print this out.
Right.
So I think.
That's great.
But it would be so awesome if that was, standard, and it will be, I'm sure, but it would be nice if it was standard throughout the entire state of Rhode Island, too.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, my next question. To improve the level of knowledge and civic engagement of your graduates, are you considering changes in your school system's course on civics? If not, why not? And if so, at what grade level would you implement changes? Dr. Cummings?
So one of the things that we're always looking at is how do we take student feedback? And how are we taking student feedback and looking at their experiences and being responsive to their needs. So when you were, in the previous question, asking really about how do we get kids more involved, and one of the things that I believe Narragansett does very well is this idea of building community. And civic engagement in an increasingly individualized society requires an element of caring about your community. And in order to be caring about your community, you have to build relationships. And for us, one of the things that we do really well and very intentionally is building those relationships, whether it's through face-to-face discussions, whether it's through going out and meeting new people, whether it's through having a new experience. And so when you ask about how are we thinking about changing things? Well, what we know is that we have to build in feedback loops along the way. And so for us, we're getting great results from a lot of our students, but not every student. Right? So what do we need to do to make sure that every student walks away with that deep civic engagement and caring about their community? You know, we've talked about requiring students to go to a public meeting. You know, we've talked about having an action research project that is focused not always on federal, but also on local and on state government. And also trying to enact change. So how are student voices represented in everything that we're doing? So I think our curriculum is constantly being adjusted, and I'm sure that's true for everyone up here. And for us, I think a larger question is not only do they know what to do, but how do we get them to engage in the process, right? And so that's really for us, developing that caring about what happens and understanding in an increasing polarized society that you might not always get exactly what you want. Right. You might have to, understand the fundamentals of democracy that is sometimes compromised. Okay. And so getting and walking away with that, I think for us is one of the things that we want.
That's it. Anybody else?
So we did make a change in our district over the last year, and that was prompted from reports in the newspaper just about the citizenship test and how many adults, as you've kind of already alluded to, now if they took it might not do very well. Right. So our superintendent asked, well, how would our students do? And we didn't know the answer. So what we did is we now give the students a citizenship test, 50 questions, and they take that at the end of the U.S. history course. And then based on their responses, if they've passed and they've done well, then that's great. And that's part of their portfolio towards what's required for graduation. So every student does need to take this assessment and pass it. If they don't pass it, then that we target instruction, so we provide further instruction for them on that topic, and they have a chance to retake it. So not everybody passed it the first time, right. And so that was really good data that we had, which said, okay, now these are the students that we need to work further with on. So I think that has been a very good solution because we do teach it in that course, but really it's until you assess it, it's hard to know whether or not the students have learned it. And so that's been how we get our feedback to see, okay, what else do we need to do to make sure that they have the opportunity to learn it.
I think that's a great idea. When I was doing the research for the class that I was teaching, one of the things somebody gave me was a copy of a book written by a woman named Sylvia Hidalgo, who was becoming a citizen of the United States, and she was a person who, she was a very specific student. She liked to create all sorts of study notes, etc. And she took all the issues that would be used in the actual test for citizenship, and she created a study guide, and the study guide was turned into a book. And it's a fascinating read, I have to say. It's huge. It's got probably about 70 pages. And the questions people are asked who become citizens of the United States are questions I'm pretty sure some of us would get some of them wrong, let's just put it that way. So it's an interesting piece of literature to use to show people what they really need to know. I was really impressed by that. Okay, next question. This one is just for teachers. It's the only other one that's just for teachers. How do you or would you teach civics in the context of U.S. history and world history and current affairs? It's a broad question.
Are you talking about integrating?
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And I think you touched on it a little bit before, talking about, world history.
Sure. I think we try to integrate it in all of the courses. So if you're studying in our 10th grade government class, there's a continual look at current issues. having students pick out issues that they're interested in, showing students issues in civics class this past fall. I put on, they were working on something independently, and I put the Kavanaugh hearings on the screen, and every kid stopped their work and they were watching. And so, so I think just through current issues, that naturally integrates the material. In terms of U.S. history, when, I haven't taught it in a few years, but when we were, when we're writing our curriculum, again, that issue of relevance, if you can tell the students why they need to know it and how it relates to what our current state in our society is, that's really profound, and that's where I think you begin to get the hook. The other aspect that I think is really important is the skill building. So in terms of registering to vote, we don't necessarily go through, what exactly they need to do, but they look at the website, they know what's required to be a registered voter, but we talk about for those people going away and what that's like and that process is like, and what does that mean for college students who have to jump through some extra hoops in order to vote. We give them, to start off that unit, where they are researching current elections, we print out Narragansett's ballot and put it in front of them with no preparation. And then I ask them, well, how does that feel? And it doesn't feel good. And in that moment, they are aware that this isn't just showing up to vote. There's some work ahead of time. And I think when we start to put those experiences in classes and embed them, just a protocol where they're talking about contentious issues, but in a very structured way, we're showing them, we're modeling how you do this in greater society. And I think those are the kinds of things that we have to see present in any curriculum that's going to engage students and prepare them.
And I think building off the skills, no matter what course, which one they're in, whether it's world history in ninth grade, they're learning the important skills of research. They're learning the importance of understanding the other side. And I think that's just so important in terms of incorporating that. So when they're becoming well-informed citizens, they're not just, basing off their decisions off of a couple of talking points. They're looking at the other side, they're understanding more fully their side, they know how to get the information, access that, and they know how to express themselves, whether it be through an oral presentation, through a written presentation, and so I think that's also important.
You can go first.
Okay, Mr. Whitaker.
So one of the things that we were very deliberate about the last curriculum revision cycle was really trying to link our courses as best we can and without repetition. And one of the places that we wanted to be deliberate in terms of making sure that students had access to the full curriculum was over the issue of government in terms of the Constitution, which is taught in the 8th grade, but coming up to the high school. And US 1, in particular, the 4th quarter, is all about civic engagement and civic education. And then it's followed through in US History 2, which 11th and 12th graders, 11th or 12th graders, depending on when they take it. We decided to do a thematic approach. In the first quarter, the theme is what is the proper role of government, and where we tackle issues of liberalism versus conservatism and trying to figure out what the planks of those platforms look like, and not just about, as you were mentioning, going to the voting booth and then not knowing what you're doing, but really understanding what the issues were and where political parties fall within those issues. And so by the end of US History 2, we feel as though they have been grounded in the fundamentals of civic education, but more importantly, that they understand the issues that surround each political party. And that's kind of the goal of our curriculum, really.
Kenyon?
I have to say that I agree with everything that's saying things happening at South Kingstown. One of the things that is important, and I think we bring into any social studies class we're teaching, is synthesis, like trying to like relate what happened today, like something happened in the news. Well, where have you seen this before? Because history does repeat itself, as old as that saying is. And I think that to them, and making them be sort of in the driver's seat of their education, and knowing to say, okay, well, what's the background? Why? Okay, but why? You know, and constantly seeing. And I think we study history through people and the role in their civic participation. And I think that's something that's sort of underlying theme, whether you're studying Western Civ, global, or U.S. history. I think it's there, and it's important to constantly making those connections between today and yesterday. And I think that really helps kids really make that connection.
Good point. Mr. Lemanowitz?
So you'd mentioned how we approach these, and a lot of this we do, we embed these expectations in curriculum. And, writing curriculum is laborious, but it's easy. You can put standards anywhere. And, there's three kinds of curriculum. There's the written curriculum, and there's the taught curriculum, what actually you have time to teach and actually gets taught. And then there's the learned curriculum. And then in education, the way we try to keep ourselves accountable to what is taught is through standardized testing. And that's why reading and math tend to hit the spotlight along with science. I'm a little ambivalent about that concept because a standardized test on civic engagement is very uninspiring. And I'm wondering if we ever get into the spotlight, if maybe we can think a little bit outside the box and how we measure civic engagement of our students. Maybe it is not a bubble test, but something where they do have to do something that is more actionable.
Okay. That's an interesting thought. You can find out who voted in November, right? And if they knew what they were doing. Okay, we're back to everybody again. Given that only 23% of American seniors score at or above proficient in civics on the National Assessment of Education Progress, the NAAEP test, do you think the RIDE guidelines for civic education, while allowing each school system to decide what to teach is sufficient? Why or why not? Does your curriculum meet or exceed the RIDE guidelines, which I think are pretty broad, so. But anyway. Anybody? Go ahead.
I think that having participated in and having members of our former department chair, Anne-Marie Zaborski, also, and Gina Jarama also participated, and probably some other people up here, in the writing of those grade span expectations for civics and government, that I think they're very strong.
Do you?
If you follow them. But there's no civics police.
Right.
So that's the issue. And one thing that I'm particularly struck by as I'm listening to the wealth of experiences that students in our systems get to have is that clearly those results, it is not equitable statewide. So it isn't happening statewide, and there is such a strong need for this. We have, as your president mentioned, they have recently recommissioned, which Superintendent Cummings will be serving on the Civic Education Legislative Commission. And we have a very strong civic education coalition that is active, and we're always looking for more people to join us in our quest, because that's what we want to do. We want every student in the state to have that kind of experience.
Okay. Anyone else?
I would, certainly build on what Kristen is saying as, the poor scores on civic education certainly point to the inequalities, from community to community, throughout the state. I would also say that, like all of our skills, pointing at just one subject area is somewhat faulty logic. To understand how civics work, you have to be well-versed in problem solving. You have to read and write well. You have to have analytical thought. You have to have all those different pieces. And so, I'm as concerned about civic education doing poorly as I am about our reading and writing scores, as I am about our math scores across the state. They all point to pockets of inequality that are not good for our democracy. So that is a symptom of a larger problem, I would say.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Anyone else? Tony?
So to the point of the original question are the guidelines strong enough? I guess my quick answer would be no, they're not. I mean, as a secondary level department head for social studies, I would love to see a more rigorous curriculum built before students get to the ninth grade. I think if there was regulation coming from the state level that was a little bit stronger with that, I think that might be achieved statewide. But hopefully that's something that will happen in the near future.
And sort of to both of what you're both saying is that you could put this all into, so that in younger years, younger grades, that they are learning science and social studies and math and like all these things, because they all go together. They do need, you need them all to be a well-rounded person. But I feel like where you could be doing more analytical writing and thought with science, but also social studies. So it would be nice to see that be more in the forefront so it doesn't get put on the back burner as much as it has been.
Interesting and true. I was a history major, and one of the things that I tell people, because people kind of look at you if you're a history major, like, well, so what did you do with that? And I wasn't a teacher, my answer is a lot. I learned how to think, I learned how to research, I learned how to write, I learned how to speak, I learned a lot of things from history, and I think, maybe it is time for people to understand that incorporated with all the other key elements of education, this is important, so totally agree. Do you think adoption of a statewide required, I think you just answered this, Tony. Do you think an adoption of a statewide required civics curriculum would be a good idea? Why or why not? Dr. Cummings?
So, just like is happening in mathematics, in English language arts, the idea of providing statewide resources, I think, is certainly of great benefit to create a level playing field. And one of the pieces that I think you've heard here tonight is that developing a personalized approach, building relationships, having it embedded in your community, are really important in order to encourage the participation of students in the civic process. So, requiring students to take civics, sure. Making it flexible enough that it meets the needs of each community, I think it would be the challenge with that.
Okay, anyone else? All right. My next question, according to a recent article in Education Week, 36 states currently require a high school civics course, with 8 requiring at least one-year course. 19 states require a civics exam for graduation. Would you support or not support the following curriculum changes, and why? A mandatory civics course of at least one semester in middle school and or high school, a civics course as a high school graduation requirement, a graduation exam on civics. Who wants to start that one? Mr. Ricker?
So, as we've already mentioned, in Chariho, we just have adopted the citizenship test as part of a larger graduation requirement. And I think that that's a huge step forward. I'm not sure about the other districts in terms of whether or not they have adopted that, but it is a little bit jarring when you get the results back. And kind of see where students are. So I feel like that's a great step because, first of all, we're seeing what those gaps are in terms of what they're retaining in terms of civics education, number one. Number two, it's not just passing like with a 70. They have to actually get an 80 of the 50 questions on the assessment in order for it to be able to count for their graduation portfolio. So I think this is a good first step. I'm not sure whether or not it's right or wrong, whether or not the state should mandate that. I'm not here to judge that, but I do think that all districts should take steps forward in moving the ball forward.
And I would just say I've heard on this panel that, we might have this test, but then in other districts, they have other expectations in their senior projects which have a civics requirement component to it. So it sounds to me that the districts in South County do have some type of requirement towards graduation with civics. In terms of, requiring like a specific, here's a civics course, then there are questions that would come out of that, which are, all right, so we have a U.S. history course requirement. Is it part of that course? Is it like an additional course? And then what gives? Because there's only so many courses students can take, and there's a lot of requirements that they need for graduation. So we just have to think of the whole picture. It's not, this is important or it isn't. That's really not the problem. It is important. But then we have to look at the whole picture of what's required of students for graduation, and how does it fit in that picture?
Process is complicated.
Yeah.
I really only have one other question left, and one of the reasons I'm asking it is because when I tried to do a little research. I was asked to take this position relatively late, but I always try to know what I'm talking about at least a little. And one of the things I did when I was researching was I just took a look, partly because Nina had mentioned some of these to me, but at what was online, as far as civics education is concerned, as far as civics is concerned. And there were some pretty interesting organizations engaging in civics education. So, and I could share those with you, but more importantly, I was curious about what tools and methods and research you do to come up with your curriculum. You need a yellow card here. Go ahead.
I mean, I guess the easiest answer there is to just be informed, you know what I mean? Making sure that you're paying attention to what's going on in the world and not listening to just one source, and making sure you're teaching your students that, no, that's not the only source out there. Make sure you hear it from several different ways. I think, and obviously there's a multitude of resources online, but I think the best way is making sure that we're informed ourselves.
I think, so we've used iCivics, we've used Choices curriculum units, where there's deliberative discussion around substantive issues. And I think for us, choosing different components that are available, really, it's what's in them.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, you do not want to just be checking off a box.
Right.
And I think that goes back to the problem of, I do not support, taking a test and saying, oh, okay, you studied these facts and now you are a citizen, good luck. Because I don't think the skills necessarily would be there with that type of a mandatory assessment. However, given the fact that there is such disparity statewide, I do think that there has to be a little more of a push to make sure that quality curriculum is put into the schools. And so I don't necessarily oppose a mandated civics semester or course. But I do think that one thing that is really key and really critical is making sure that many teachers are in on selecting and vetting that type of curriculum. Because if you are doing something that's phenomenal in your classroom, I want to know about it because I want to use it in mine. And we absolutely have to have more of that sharing. And right now, there's not a lot of that. We are siloed in our schools. Evidenced by the fact that this is the first time that I've met 3 of the teachers up here, and we work within 20 miles of each other. That's not right. That has to be fixed. And so I think in terms of vetting materials, yes, there is a wealth out there. PBS has materials. I mean, we probably all have used things across the board, but you don't necessarily have time to explore, but if I get a tip from Mr. Jobert, I'm certainly going to be using it the next day in my classroom.
Absolutely. One of the ones that I found that I thought was so interesting was it's a podcast that's produced by New Hampshire Public Radio called Civics 101 Podcast. I didn't get a chance to actually, investigate it, but I thought that was really kind of an interesting modern approach to, to getting at the issues. And each podcast is about a specific issue. That much I did identify, which also leads me to the complexity of the press and the internet and all the ways in which people find information. Newspapers are presumably a dying breed, although they're pretty alive online. I was curious about, and I have this memory of, at least in 1 year in school, having, the Providence Journal delivered to school for every single, student in whatever grade level that was. That was a million years ago, so it probably does not happen anymore. But I was curious how you deal with the press in terms of civics education. Go ahead, Mr. Julia.
One resource that I learned about this year at a conference was a website, All Sides, and it actually presents the major news stories of the day, but then it'll have like a conservative paper, a more liberal paper, and then a paper that's considered in the middle. So that's a place that I have students start at when they start looking for a current event, because many of them already have publications that they're already drawn to,
Right.
so they can just at least find out like where is their publication on the spectrum based off of this particular website, and also take a look at other articles from other papers that are more moderate, mainstream, or liberal or conservative.
Dr. Cummings?
And, what you're getting to, and I'm sure this is true in every district up here, is learning to be critical consumers of information.
Right.
We start that from an early age. We, teach our students to understand what are verifiable and legitimate and impartial sources versus sources that are taking a particular point of view. We do a lot of work on primary versus secondary sources, and we do a real lot of work on verifying information through multiple sources. And so, I am, again, that's part of the literacy standards, it's part of the research standards, it's something that, we work on from the earliest age. And so because of that, it again gets back to the integration of the disciplines. They may be learning that in a literacy class, they may be learning that in an early history class, but then applying that to a civics class is really something that you have to be very intentional about. And having been in Matt and Kristen's classes quite a bit, they are very intentional about that, and I'm sure that's true across the board.
Staley?
I would just say that, in my opinion, and I have a 23-year-old and a 29-year-old, and I can tell you that my kids have had more access to information than I ever did when I was growing up. So not every home got the newspaper. But in our district, we're 1-to-1, and every student at the high school gets a laptop in the middle school. So with that comes also great responsibility, because they have to learn how to use that tool properly. And we do teach that in a media literacy course, actually, that ninth graders are required to take, which is really being able to vet what they read and see online. But what I'm trying to get at is that I just think that we have better informed citizens than we've ever had. But what's important is for us to teach them how to become best informed and to really look at what they're reading online and decide what is real and what is not, and use judgment. So that's an important part. It's also, I think, provides a lot more information for kids to make decisions and be better informed and politically active and excited about what changes are going on in the world, because they can learn about it very quickly. And they have that research and information right at their fingertips. So,
And just to build on what Jane is saying, there's an assumption that if students know what to do, they're going to do it. And one of the things that we talk about quite a bit is how do we not only get them informed about the process, but involved in the process. And so our senior project is a model of that. We get them deeply involved in something they care about, and then they look at it from multiple angles. and then start to understand how their involvement in whatever project that is may involve going to the town council. We've had students, do a road race for a charity, and they've had to go and schedule time in front of the town council and go to a public hearing and request that. So those are the things that we try to design for our students, so they understand that they can be active participants in the civic discourse and in the life of a town or in the life of a state.
That's important. Anyone else? Tony?
So I would agree wholeheartedly in what's been said about what students have access today and what they need to process that information. I mean, if you'd asked me 10 years, or if you'd told me 10 years ago that in 10 years, pretty much every middle school student would have a smartphone in their hand with unfettered access to, everything out in the world. And it seems in 21st century education world here, it's difficult keeping up with where society's going. We're playing a lot of catch-up games, and so we put these things in these kids' hands without the tools for them to actually use them responsibly. And so I think that puts even more of, not a burden, but a heavy responsibility on public schools to educate kids properly. And I think that falls within the realm of civics, but within the broader spectrum of the literacy skills, digital literacy, information literacy, because it's something that there's a lot of research being done on what kids can actually handle, and as a society we are giving them too much right now. I've heard of analogies to well-stocked liquor cabinets in homes without locks on the doors. I mean, we've put something addictive in their hands and without the tools to actually use that responsibly. And I think that's this conversation tonight feeds into providing them what they need for what's going to be coming down the pike in the rest of this 21st century.
And the evolution is so fast. That's the other thing
It's
that's so
exponential.
difficult. Yeah. Okay, well, we have a little time, so if anybody would like to just make a statement of any kind, I'd like to give you an opportunity to do that, and then we'll open it up for any questions from the audience. Anybody have anything they'd like to say? Tony?
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to take at least one opportunity. I've been in education for a quarter of a century now, and I don't think we often talk enough about how awesome our kids are, considering everything that they are exposed to and we expect of them. I've over the past couple of years, with not just the big things that make the headlines, like the kids down in Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in Parkland, Florida, or the kids who raised the Black Lives Matter flag in Montpelier, Vermont. I mean, but these kids are doing amazing things, and I think those are the best measures of where our society is going in terms of students who are civically engaged, civic-minded, and that will uphold our democratic principles going forward. So it's not easy being an adolescent in 2019, and we put a lot of burden on them, and knowing that the world is going at a rapid pace, and trying to get them prepared for what comes next is not easy for us, but it's probably even more difficult for them.
I think so. Go ahead.
So one thing that has definitely struck us this week, and Lane from the Secretary of State's office mentioned it before when we were talking, is there were 3 events centered on civic education this week in Rhode Island. And so Monday night, we had people from Massachusetts. They just recently passed a bill on mandating civics education in their schools. That was passed in November 2018, and we had incredible representatives there talking about the coalition of organizations from the Kennedy Institute, the Kennedy Library, iCivics, Generation Citizen, all of these groups working together with one goal, and they made it happen. And we have this event tonight. Tomorrow, we will have the first meeting of the Legislative Commission, and I feel that there's great hope and great energy around this issue at this point in time, and the more people who are on board making this happen, it's going to be better for our society at large, absolutely.
Yep. I agree. Anyone else? Okay, well, we can open it up. What? You have a surprise?
I want to introduce a student from Westerly, Devin Hetu. She is our first student member of the League in South County. and along with a league member, ran 5 voter registration drives this past fall in the community. She has, I'm sure, some strong opinions, but I just want to tell one little anecdote about her. I met her before she joined the league a summer ago, and one of the questions I asked her was, how many students did she think in the senior class, she was going to be a senior, were civically engaged, politically motivated, interested in activism, and so on. I don't know how many students there are in the senior class.
Almost 200.
How many?
Almost 200.
Okay, almost 200. She said 4. I said 4? She said yes, 4. So I think it would be helpful tonight to have a student's point of view on civics education, and how do you get more teenagers, more young people really, let alone those of us our age, invested, whether it's a single cause, whether it's just be passionate about something that has to do with improving our democracy in our country. So Devin.
The first thing I want to say is that I've received an excellent education from Westerly High School, especially within the social studies department, and I feel as if it's opened up a lot of opportunities for me. But one thing I've noticed as a student in the civics program right now as a senior is that not a lot of kids are aware of what's going around them. So the whole focus of my senior project is a voter registration drive. So I've been registering students to vote throughout the whole entire town because I want more political involvement within the youth. So one thing I notice is when I've been giving my presentations, that's what we learn how to do pretty much. In our civics course is only presentations. We don't really have too much of a civics component, which I'd like to see, but there's a lot of kids that need help with presenting. But one thing I've noticed when I was giving my presentations is I'd put up a picture of, say, Sheldon Whitehouse, Jack Reed, and maybe one person in the entire class would know who it was. And I saw an issue with that, so now in all my presentations, I usually put up a picture of someone who I think people should know, and then I explain to them who it is and how it affects them, because I'd like to see other teenagers get involved and realize that these issues do affect them.
Okay. Thank you. That was very interesting. Are we ready for questions?
We have time for a few questions from the audience, so we can do it one or two ways. You can run up here to the microphone, or you can stand up, and hopefully the panel will be able to hear you. Anybody? I don't really have, I probably am loud enough. I don't really have a question, but I'd like to share with you one of the things that the League of Women Voters is doing, and we've done this for the last 11 years. We run an awards program where we give $1,000 to any teacher teaching civics. And this is a competitive award. So it's $1,000, $500, $250. We have sent emails out to all the superintendents. We've sent emails out to all the teachers. We send emails, but the bottom line is, when you get an email in your incredibly busy day from the League of Women Voters, you think, oh, I'll get to that. But what happens is a lot of people don't, and we understand that. So I have some flyers here that tell you how to nominate, and I'd like you to look in your classrooms or even yourself and send us one application. If I get 7 applications, I will be thrilled. Mm-hmm. But if you know of a parent, you can nominate somebody else. You can nominate yourself. You can give this to a parent, have them nominate somebody. Please, I'll give you, I have the flyer here. You can copy it. You can hand it out to all of your teachers. This is pre-K to 12. A few years ago, we had 2 second-grade teachers win. They were co-teaching, a special ed teacher with a regular ed teacher. They were baking cupcakes, selling them in the teacher's room, because we know that teachers will buy anything. These are second graders. And then researching around the world
where to donate the money. These were kids in inner city Providence who didn't have money themselves, who were looking outside and beginning to try to understand a world much, much, much larger than their world. We were so impressed with what these two teachers did in that little classroom. So we want you to know that if you know somebody who's teaching kids very simple lessons in civics or very complicated, it is, but it's worth it because we'll give them $1,000 and tell them to go and enjoy it. So I'm gonna give everybody a flyer. I don't.
I would like to, I'd just like to make one other point because my back has been to the audience the whole time I've been here. And I don't know if she was here while I was saying this, but the Secretary of State, Nellie Robert, is here. And I would just like to take a moment to thank her for her website, which I use all the time and I love. So,
Nellie, come on up.
Secretary Gorbea.
Hi, no, thank you. No, so I had another commitment in Providence and literally like dashed down the highway safely to make it here. And I was glad I could actually get a little bit. Lane Sparkman, my phenomenal civics education coordinator, has been here taking voluminous notes for me that we'll go over tomorrow at work. But I just want to say, first of all, thank you. Thank you for everything you do to engage our children to become better citizens. It's a joy to work with you. I know that in many ways, I remember going to Westerly to do, the actual voting machines that we've offered. I think it was mentioned earlier, but we've offered all high schools in the state the opportunity to have real ballots and real voting machines for their student government elections. In some, and this is private schools, public schools, any school. Why? Because it's a very different experience. I mean, I have two teenagers that have 3 kids now, and they do not like mock anything. I mean, if you have to do mock, you can do mock, but if you can do real, where people recognize those names on the ballots, they know that when that receipt comes out of the machine, somebody's gonna be happy, somebody's gonna be really sad. It's a personal relationship with that ballot and what it means to vote. And so we have that. We've got we redesigned our activity books and put them as PDFs online. And I know that many of you are using it. One of my pride and joys was the municipal page, because I think a lot of kids hear about the national stuff and the media doesn't pay enough attention to its state and local. And there are so many decisions that are made at the state and local level. So we've created a one-pager that basically prompts those questions. How many, what's your council comprised of? How many people can one person vote for? If you live in Providence, it's one council person. If you live in Woonsocket, it's many more. I should know this by now. But anyway, so because it's an at-large council. So these are all questions that I think our kids need to internalize so that they know that if you move at some point from Narragansett to Providence, you're talking about a different third of your ballot at the bottom. Like, these are different structures that we have. And I will say this, you are all faced with a real challenge, because American democracy, compared to other setups of government, is incredibly complicated. I call it democracy on steroids, right? Because God forbid you move to another state where actually there's county governments. I couldn't even begin to explain to you how that works. So it is complicated. And I give you a lot of credit for engaging them on this. So all I want to say is, I'm here to partner with you. I mean, we're now in the process, you may have heard, of trying to build a Rhode Island State Archives and Rhode Island Exhibition Center, History Exhibition Center. Why? Because it's a civic space that we can talk about what is the history of our community, how did we get there, and that civic engagement piece is absolutely critical to that experience. We did an exhibit at the end of last year on 380 years of I voted. We have been voting in Rhode Island, or some people have, for 380 years. Now, at the very beginning, it was the guys, it was certain guys, and you had to put your name and who you were voting for. And then over time, that changed. And what I think that shows to kids is These setups that you might have a problem with are not set in stone or concrete. They were developed at a time, and then they were changed, and then they were changed again. And we have that power as a community to say, this structure doesn't fit our needs anymore. Let's work on it. So I'm here just to say that I would love to hear from you. Let me know how my office can help. I have not taken the Massachusetts route of the actual legislation because I thought before I did that I really needed to listen, needed to work with you all. I'm now in my second term. I know that the Civics Commission, I'm going to go by there tomorrow. However we can do this, because it is so critically important, not just to Rhode Island or South County, but to our country. So I'm here to roll up my sleeves and work with you in however way we can do this. Thank you.
I'd also like some applause for our panel and for our moderator. Let me just make one comment. I'm really struck by how at least these school systems are trying through the grades in your own way to do two things. One, impart some education to the kids that has to do with civics and government. And I think equally important is to provide a way for them to get engaged in something that relates to physics. And I also agree with you that there's so many things that kids have to do today, and there's so many requirements. And my understanding is I think there are 3 years, am I right, that are required in social studies for the Rhode Island diploma. And the idea of putting civics in there means maybe you got to kick something else off. So the question which most of you didn't want to answer was, where do you stand? Do you think that guidelines are fine so long as they're enforced? They're not being enforced from what you're saying and from what we read in the newspaper. Or do you think that and somebody else is going to decide, hopefully with input from citizens as well as teachers as well as politicians, going to decide, will you take the route that some of the other towns and states have taken, I don't mean towns, states have taken, and have a mandated course and a mandated exam and a mandated curriculum? Or will Rhode Island continue, in a sense, to allow school systems to do their own thing? And that's a question that I guess the commission and the coalition and so on are going to weigh in on. Okay, I need to do some formal thank yous. So thank you to the members of the audience. Thank you to the members, hopefully, of the cable TV, the PEG RI TV that is live streaming this. And I do want to tell you that this was videotaped, this program was videotaped and will be on a link to it will be on our webpage and on the YouTube channel we have. So our webpage, if you've got a pencil, is lwv.org/LWV_South_County.html. And our Facebook is easier, League of Women Voters -South County. I'm sure you can find it. Kevin over there tells me that hopefully the YouTube by the end of day tomorrow. So you can look at it. Nellie, you won't need notes. You can watch it from the beginning. And I hope you will spread the word and ask other people to watch. I'd also like to thank Westerly's PEG RI TV for live streaming this, and the town of Narragansett for graciously letting us use this hall, as well as for the staff here at the town hall for being so helpful and cooperative. Lastly, if this program has piqued your interest and you'd like to contribute to future programs and voter service activities such as registration and candidate forums that the League does, please consider joining the League by completing a form. You should have all gotten a form when you came in, and the membership chair will call you, contact you in some way. And finally, we'd really appreciate your completing the surveys on the program. That helps us to do a better job the next time around. Thank you.